So this is Object Relations Family Therapy. I'm Adam Kranz,
I'm Reggie Castillo.
and we're going to get into our theory. So these are some of the key theorists and concepts of Object Relations Family Therapy. I'm going to start at the beginning and go towards the end. So to start us off, Sigmund Freud is the basis of this theory. He's the father of psychoanalysis, and he created drive psychology. His kind of drive psychology theory is the kind of theoretical basis for this whole orientation. It's created on this idea that libido is the energy that kind of moves us through what he calls psychosexual stages in order. Those are oral, anal, phallic, and genital. This is all very focused on kind of how sexual drives bring us from one stage of life into the next. Some key kind of concepts he coined, I guess is what to say, is the Oedipus and Electra complex. So this idea that we have an intimate relationship and a kind of sexual energy towards our opposite gendered parent, where we then have a fantasy of killing and then taking the place of our same gendered parent. This generally ends in the reconciliation of the same gendered parent and the kind of normalization of relations with the opposite gendered parent. He also coined the idea of the id, ego, and superego, the id being the kind of like primal instinct, the ego being the parent or the what I might need to do, and then superego being this kind of like authority figure, this what is right and wrong in a kind of superstructural way. Melanie Klein is our next theoretician. I'm only briefly going to go through each one because we don't have that much time. She coined the term fantasy with a PH, this psychological fantasy, as a way that we internalize external objects in our life. These mental processes that we go through to cope with struggles in life are projection, where we bring our internal feelings onto external objects, introjection, where we take aspects of external objects and internalize them for ourselves, and splitting, where we take introjections and split them into good and bad parts, which we universally repress. Klein believed that we, as children, can only process part objects, so we can't see the mother, only the breast. And then as we grow up, we gain the depressive position of that, and we kind of internalize the whole object, and it depresses our sense of like separation anxiety with it, where babies kind of yearn for the breast and they can't be away from it. As they become children and see the whole mother, they have a kind of depressed sense of attachment. In the mid-century, you get the W.R.D. Fairburn. He believes the ego is present at birth and that children always act in a relational way to human objects. He also believes that we kind of split objects and internalize the bad and then put the good on the external. That's where he kind of splits from Klein. He also believes in the stages of infantile dependence, going into a transitional stage where there's some dependence and some kind of separation, and then a mature relational phase once children grow up and split from their parents. Then there is D.W. Wincott. He coined the term the good enough mother and the facilitating environment, which was a kind of good enough environment. It was all about this idea that no, they're not these idealized goods or bads, but rather that parents tend to strive for what is enough for their kids, and children tend to kind of accept that idea that mother may not be perfect, but she is essentially good. Mother gradually gains independence after the child kind of is the center of their life when they're first born. And as that child matures, they then start to separate as well. He believed that infants kind of view themselves as omnipotent, so all-powerful and the complete kind of center of the universe, and their true self only develops as their sense of omnipotence lessens. Generally, the mother-child form a unit in early life, which goes from complete dependence into relative dependence into independence as they grow up, not so dissimilar from Fairburn. Margaret Mahler is our next one. She had this kind of interesting belief that infants are actually what she called, in a sense, autistic, where they had this kind of separation from the world and from social interactions. They then moved into symbiosis with their mother, where they became kind of enmeshed, and then later engaged in separation. This separation phase was separated into 4 parts: differentiation, body image, practicing, and then rapprochement, where you have a kind of returning of relationship with the parent. They believe, or she believed, there's a psychological birth when infants separate from their mother. Mitchell took this systemic approach to object relations, believing there was this kind of relational matrix made up of transactional patterns fueled by Freudian drives. There's no distinct developmental stages, it's continuous, and that psychopathology only occurs from maladaptive relational matrices. Henry Stack Sullivan focused on interactional rather than intrapsychic beliefs. So he wanted to focus on how we deal with each other, not just how we deal with ourselves. He's the first to refer to the significant other rather than simply just the parent object or the external object. Individuals, in his mind, always function in relationship to another person, not simply on their own. He created these three ideas called prototaxic distortion, parataxic distortion, and then parataxical integrations. Prototaxic distortions are really how infants and children talk, this kind of stream of consciousness. There's no cause and effect. It's just like letting out everything they think. Parataxic distortions are a kind of faulty cause and effect reasoning. They tend to infest pairs of individuals and allow them to form these kind of parataxical integrations if they become very, very attached. This is two people who are mutually reactive to each other's judgments, hostilities, triggers, etc. To me, it kind of screamed this idea of codependency, of two people who are so entirely enmeshed that they become very, very reactive to each other. Finally, we have David and Jill Scharf. They focused on the family rather than the individual, and they really bring this into family object relations theory. They believe that individuals couple based on unconscious and conscious compatibility, and that unconscious compatibility is really due to choosing partners who counter our repressed parts. So if I repress something in myself, I may choose a partner who embraces that kind of thing about themselves. They believe in a mutually projective identification. So it's not just one person who does that in a relationship, but both do, which can be very confusing sometimes. The goal of family therapy for them is to reintegrate projective parts into oneself so that your repressed feelings and identity do not then reemerge in your children. All right, here are some interventions.
All right, I'm going to be covering some interventions for us. So first, we're going to talk about therapeutic goals and roles. So the goal of object relations therapy is to recognize and then rework defensive projection identifications. So if people within the family are splitting, if they're repressing some part of themselves, right, in order to avoid trauma that they're not ready to address within the family, we want to try to bring that to the surface and then rework it. Treatment of families' capacity to provide contextual holding. There's an idea of holding the conflict, right? Allowing space to go through all of the negative emotions that a person might be struggling with. Reinstatement or construction of centered holding relationships. A return of family to the developmental level appropriate to life tasks. So one of the examples we saw in the book included some older teenage daughters who were kind of enlisted almost as co-parents with some younger siblings. And the idea, right, is that they're trying to save their dad from some struggle he's having, connecting with the boys. They've now assumed an inappropriate role in the family, and they're kind of guarding him from dealing with his own struggle, overcoming that, and then forming a healthier attachment with the new sons. Clarification of remaining individual needs. Object relations is really interested in the individual as part of the family unit. So some family theories are going to look at the whole family as an entire system. You're trying to treat the system. Object relations really wants to dig into each individual member of the family and what their individual struggle is. So for example, with two parents, you would probably address each parent individually, their own relationships with their parents, their relationships individually with each other, their relationships individually with each child. And so you're really breaking the system down into all these kind of component parts to find out where are the pieces actually not fitting together the way that they want to. And part of that is because this is such a past-oriented theory, really digging into each person's past and their background, trying to bring the subconscious to the conscious, right? All of that requires you to dig into each individual member of the family more than just working on the whole system as a unit. The role of the therapist in this theory is actually kind of unique. Obviously, all therapists want to develop insight, right? As I just talked about, we really want to focus first on the individual over the collective. Obviously, you still address the collective, but individuals is kind of where you start breaking things down. Um, but with the role of the therapist in object relations, right? There's the idea of the blank slate that kind of comes from Freud. You're not bringing as much of your personality into that process because the focus is less on your relationship with the family members as you develop that insight, and more in just kind of slowly sussing out these little things that you see that maybe they can't see because they're repressing it, they're splitting, they've developed a defense mechanism, etc. We take on systemic chaos in order to make it safe to experience. So, kind of going back to providing that capacity to restructure relationships, to experience chaos, we've created a holding space for families. We don't want to avoid the chaos the family is experiencing, any pain or dysfunction they're experiencing. We want to give them space to actually act out that dysfunction in a therapeutic context where we can see it and they can see it, rather than repressing it where it falls back into the subconscious. And then all of that, of course, goes into developing a mutual knowing and understanding, right? Every member of the family gains a deeper understanding, not only of themselves as an individual, but with each of their family members as an individual and as a system. So some techniques, getting a little more specific, analysis of resistance. How does resistance speak for the whole group? Resistance is going to present differently, obviously. Where an individual, for example, might avoid talking about something, and a therapist might read that as resistance within a family. Again, I think of that example that we had in our book where the dad is really struggling to work through some emotion, and is not really wanting to speak about the suicide of his son, for example. And it takes time for him to build that comfort level to suss that out. And that discomfort is being experienced by the whole family, but the dad is the one who finally is actually able to voice this trauma the family has experienced. Enlarging the field of perception. So we want to make sure all family members are being brought in, right? Sometimes a family member might fall into the background because other members are just holding a lot more space. Maybe they're a lot more vocal about the dysfunction, right? But there could be a co-parent, a sibling, a child, whoever, who's just kind of silently internalizing all of that and is not actually vocalizing. Working in the here and now. So we definitely want to go into the past, right? But we also need to problem solve what's currently happening. One of the things discussed in the chapter was the choice of the therapist. Do you focus on the problem happening right now and try to fix it, and then start digging into the past and where that problem came from? Or do you go the other way around, try to figure out the why and then problem solve? And that's a decision that an object's relational therapist would have to make. Interpretation. So when you're looking at behavioral and verbal components, how does the family express meaning? Right? You're kind of looking for, why does things happen? I do this because of that. And then something we've already discussed a little bit in class, we have our transference and our countertransference. This kind of goes back to that Freudian idea of the therapist is a blank slate that a client can project onto. Basically, the idea is that if you hold yourself back, clients are going to have to reach for you to form connection. People seek connection with each other. And so then they're going to strive to make that connection with you as a therapist. They're going to strive to make that connection with each other. It's also a big part of is kind of decentering your own self, right? Within a object relations therapist, if countertransference is happening, it's often viewed as a negative experience. That's a time where you need to go get your own therapy and work through your own stuff, because you don't want to bring that into the room and begin projecting onto clients.
All right. That's all for our theories and techniques. Now we'll have our kind of practical video next. Thanks.
All right, this is going to be our technique video for object relations. All right, Adam, so you came in today for our individual session as part of your family therapy. It's my understanding that you and your partner have a new baby. And since the baby has joined you, there have been some concerns. So why don't you go ahead and just kind of let me know, from your point of view, what's going on?
Yeah. So we brought Leo home about 2 weeks ago, and I've been having some issues just connecting with the baby. You know, it kind of, it looks like an alien. It doesn't feel like it's mine. Every time I see it, it's like I'm kind of caring for just a little machine that eats and poops, and I'm having a hard time loving it. I don't know. I thought it would be easy. I thought I'd feel like a dad right then, but I'm just kind of, I don't know. I feel disconnected.
There's no real strong emotion when you're interacting with your child. Um, yeah, and that feeling of being a dad just really hasn't clicked into place for you yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel more like a technician caring for a little, I don't know, a little creature, like a zookeeper or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, you've described it as an alien, as a machine that just kind of goes through processes. It sounds like maybe you don't really see your child as a person yet. It's just kind of a thing that you have to take care of. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it feels awful. I feel really, really guilty about it. You know, I see Erin, and she's cooing over it. She loves it. And it seems like it gives her so much happiness. And I kind of wish I had that. I want that.
You
I feel
really
like I
want
should.
the connection that you see your partner having with the child. I'm curious, you mentioned these feelings of guilt. Can you kind of describe maybe a scenario where those feelings of guilt came up for you?
Yeah, I was burping the baby one day, and he just kind of spit up all over my back. I think I just didn't have the kind of cloths in the right place, and it just got all over me. And I remember putting it down and just rushing out of the room, and just like yelling, like getting really mad. And afterwards I just felt terrible. I felt like I was kind of rejecting my own kid. Like I'd made this thing and I didn't even want it, you know.
hmm
I felt,
Yeah, just a complete overwhelm of emotions
yeah.
after your child spit up on you. I noticed that you keep referring to your child, as it. I think that, like, as I said, it sounds like you really don't quite see your baby as a person or as a member of your family yet, maybe more as just a responsibility that it seems like you kind of don't want right now. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's he is is inconvenient. You know, he just kind of came up, and I don't really know what to do with him. I think it is weird that I'm calling him it. I Yeah, that feels strange because
Mm-hmm.
he's a person, right?
Yeah. That feeling just isn't very congruous with how you want to view him. You want to view him as your son, but he's just kind of a thing you have to take care of versus a person that you've built a relationship with, the way your partner's trying to.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think I just don't really know how to be a dad. I don't know if I've ever seen that. You know,
Mhm.
I feel like, I know what a mom's supposed to be like, and Erin's doing that really well. Like, I know my mom was really comforting and attached and lovely, but I don't, I don't know my dad.
What kind of models for fatherhood do you have in your life?
I had some teachers that were pretty good, but um, I I didn't really know my dad very well. He wasn't around very much, and I was really close with my mom. We have a great relationship. We're still really close, but I didn't. I don't like to say I didn't have a dad. He was alive, but I didn't really know him.
You might describe him maybe as distant
Might even say
or
absent. Yeah,
absent, just completely not in the picture.
yeah. And so I don't know. I sometimes it makes me feel kind of like lost. I think I don't really know what my role is in that.
Mhm.
I don't know what that's supposed to look like.
No one modeled fatherhood for you when you were younger, and now you find yourself in the role of father, and you don't know how to act that out because no one taught you that by enacting that role for you when you were a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I need like a class, but I don't know. That feels kind of forced. Like, do I
Mhm.
really need a professor to teach me how to be a dad? I feel like I should know how to do it.
It does feel very clinical to have to think about that. And it makes me wonder, you described your partner interacting with the baby. What are things that you see your partner doing with your son that you enjoy seeing that bring up positive emotions for you?
I don't know, the way she looks at it when she rocks the baby, the kind of the way she sings to it when she's feeding him, the way she plays with him. It just all is very connected. She
Mhm.
looks like she's attached.
Yeah, she's doing these actions, right? The playing, the cooing, the rocking that help those physical actions, which then show you she's emotionally connected with your child. And you've described interacting with your child, you've described feeding, changing, burping, which are very chore-like activities that we have to do with children. So I'm curious what kind of activities you do with your son that do bring any feeling of joy or feeling of connection. Do you play with him? Do you sing to him? Do you rock him to sleep?
I, I can't say that I do. It all feels so uncomfortable.
Mhm.
It's like singing to your dog. It feels kind of wrong.
Mhm.
Like I don't feel like there's a response. You know,
Mhm.
it's one thing to
I
play with like a little kid where they know what to do, right?
But a baby doesn't reciprocate in the same way that a dog or a child might with you.
Yeah, it's so one way. It feels weird, forced.
Mhm. I almost wonder if because your model for motherhood is your own mother, who you describe as caring and nurturing, and you describe your partner in the same way, if you almost see those qualities as motherly and not something that you want to embody as the father figure in the family.
Mm, you might be right about that. Yeah, it's almost like I'm trying to be just like my dad, a little not
You've
knowing
distanced yourself
anything.
from your own son. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Mhm. All right. I
Doing
think that is a good stopping place. And so this concludes our demonstration of some object relations counseling. Next, we will be moving into the discussion portion of our presentation.
all right.
Thanks.
Thank you.